Hello people of the internet, I'm CEO for CEOTheProducer.com and the Producers Blog, and today we're making an awesome sampled beat. Okay, so welcome back to another tutorial, and today, as I said in the intro, we're making a sample beat. The sample is taken from Bunny Sigler's Half a Man, and the beat in itself is really simple. There's very few elements, and that's a great thing. Now, I'm gonna start with playing just a little bit of the beat so you can get an idea of what we're talking about, and then I'll get into the specifics of each element of the beat and how I mixed it and etc, etc. So here we go. And here's the little breakdown in the middle of the beat. So after finding all the bits and pieces that I liked in the song, I chopped them up and put them into Logic's sampler right here. And I found this really nice loop, and I'm just gonna play the original sample as it is, just the loop as it is.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you,
and there it goes. So I pitched it up by 2 semitones just to have a little bit more energy and to make it a little bit quicker. And it's this one right here.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you,
So the sample is the same throughout the whole song. The only thing that changes is the processing for each section. So there's a version of the sample for the chorus, one for the verse, and one for the intro breakdown. Now, the one for the chorus, for example, had very limited processing. For example, the only real 2 things that I did was, one, EQ a little bit, and so remove a little bit of the low end, because we're gonna insert our bass and kick drums, and they need to fit in. And the other thing was just to remove a little bit of the lower mid-range and a bit of the mid-range to remove a little bit of the vocals. So the next thing was to add a bit of reverb. Now, the reverb is just to pull the sample a little bit backwards in the field. Now, let me play it with and without.
ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you, I ever survive. Without you, I'm half alive.
Now, to me, it sounds much more distant, and that's because I wanted the drums to be up front and the sample to be a little bit backwards, since a rapper that's going to sing on top of it is going to have to be more up front than the sample, so we want the sample to be a little bit in the back of the mix. Now, the last thing that I did on the chorus sample was to add a little bit of de-essing, because I was getting a little bit too much of the S's coming through. So this is with and without.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you, I ever survive. Without you, I'm half alive. Without you, I...
And I wanted to do that because once a rapper gets on it with all the S's that are normally in a vocal, they're gonna interfere with the S's in the sample, so I wanted to remove those a little bit. Now, going on to something like the sample for the verse instead, which is the same sample, just different processing. This one right here is a little bit more filtered, and that's the only difference really. I mean, it still has the reverb and the de-essing, just the EQing is a little bit different. So this is how that sounds with and without.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you, I ever survive. Without you, I...
Because the thing is, I wanted to make the transition between the chorus and the verse really noticeable, and I really wanted to get the sample out of the way of a potential rapper or singer. So let's hear the transition between the chorus and the verse.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you, I ever survive. Without you, I'm half alive. Without you, I...
This way there's a lot of space for the vocal, and it's not interfering with the sample. Now for the breakdown instead, again, really simple processing. It's really just EQ and a little bit of delay. So the EQ is filtering even more.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you, I...
So when it transitions back to the chorus, it's really exploding. So for example,
half alive. Without ever survive.
so it's really opening up in the chorus. Now I added a little bit of delay, a little bit of a slapback delay, just to push the sample for the breakdown a little bit further back and to give it a little bit more space. And that's how that sounds with and without.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you, I ever survive. Without you, I'm half alive. Without ever survive.
So I like the fact that it has a bit of a room sound, and that's really pushing it back in the mix. Now going on to something like the piano instead, for example. Now the piano is basically just doubling up on the licks that are already happening in the sample itself. So listen to the piano in the sample.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you, I...
And I just doubled them up with another piano.
Ever survive without you? Without you,
just to make those a little bit stronger. Now, the processing on the piano is really simple. Again, there's actually no EQ. I can turn this off. The compressors from the actual patch itself, and I don't actually think we need it. No, it's actually not doing anything. Let's see. Now it's not doing anything, so we don't need it. The delay, not sure what that is doing. Delay is not doing anything. There's a little bit of reverb. Just to give it a little bit more space, and that's pretty much it. So there's not much to talk about. Now the guitars instead, for example, I added some guitars in the breakdown because I thought it needed a little bit more funk. Now the guitars are just doing some really simple notes just to give it a little bit of vibe. And together with a sample. Really simple. Now the processing on the guitars is somewhat cool. Now they both are going through this amp simulator, which is basically simulating a Mesa Boogie amp. And actually, let's just remove the EQ and the reverb, and let's listen to that. Really simple, nice distortion. Now, I recorded 2 different takes and panned them one left and one right, so we get a bit of space, a bit of width. And I purposely left all the small little movements that your hand naturally makes on the guitar because I like all the sort of noisy bits, and I think it gives a little bit more character. And plus, you don't really hear them much in the mix itself, but they just give a little bit more character. Now, on the EQ side, there's not much going on. A little bit of high pass, and this notch right here was just there was just a note that was ringing out too much, and it was just annoying me. And this is the note right here. It's barely audible, but it was really messing with the whole lower mid-range, so I decided to pull it out from both guitars. And I sent both guitars to stereo aux right here, and added a nice big reverb, a large reverb. And here's how that sounds. Just so they have a little bit more vibe and they sound bigger and more distant and all that good stuff. And together with the sample is a little bit distant, so the guitars are even more distant, and they create a sort of a vibe that I liked a lot. This is without the reverb. This is with. So again, really simple. Now, I added one more guitar part, and it's just a bit of noise. I'm no guitarist by any means, so I was just trying to fake my guitar playing, and I like bends a lot, so I wanted to add one to make a sort of a Santana type of whatever, and that sounds like this in the context. And it's actually, let me just solo it so you can hear what I'm talking about. And again, the processing is very simple. There's the same amp right here, just a little bit of tweaks on the presence and bass and mids, and similar EQ to the other one, just removing even more of some really annoying frequencies around 146 hertz, and adding a little bit of delay to give it a little bit more decay. And without the reverb, without the delay. It sounds a little bit still, so the delay gives it a little bit more movement. And finally, just a large reverb to give it even more space. And plus, this is actually a thing that I do a lot. Only delay. And delay and reverb together. It sort of smoothens out everything a little bit more. Now, in context, the licks, these guitar licks are very low, and they just give a bit of ambience. They're not really meant to play notes as such.
Never survive without you. I'm half alive. Without you, I never survive. Without you, I'm half alive. Without you,
And the last thing I did on these licks was to pan them a little bit, just a little bit mad like this, a little bit left, a little bit right, so they don't always come out from the center, and they move around a little bit. So pay attention to that for a second.
never survive without you. I'm half alive. Without you, I never survive. Without you, I'm half alive. Without you, I never survive.
So just a little bit of movement, a little bit extra movement. Now, going on to something like the drums, for example. Now, the drums are interesting on a few different levels. Now, as you heard, the beat is really simple, really, really simple. Now, I'm just gonna solo them all. Here we go. Oh, and the toms, actually. Now, the kick and snare are just going on the beat, so kicks on 1 and 3, and snares on 2 and 4. Nothing to show much, really. So the kick actually is a sample from a kit that I found somewhere, I don't even remember, and this one sounds like this. Now the processing on the kick is again really simple, just removing a little bit of the sub frequencies, a little bit of that bump that it has. Actually, if we watch the analyzer, we can see these bumps. I'll just remove all the filters. So there's a few frequencies that are sort of interfering with are just making the low end a little bit more muddy. So I just sort of remove those, and let's listen to those. And I'll play all these things in context after, but let's listen to them in solo for now. So before. And actually, there's just a little bit, a small little bump at 3,500 hertz, just to give it a little bit more air and prominence in the mix. And that's that. Now, there are two snares. One is sort of a classic trap sort of snare, and this is how that sounds. Actually, I think you'll recognize this snare if I pitch it back up. Like everyone in the world uses this snare, but I think I liked it because it was really punchy and it had a lot of cracks. So it's blended in with the other snare, which is instead a little bit more rounded and has a bit more top end. Now this snare, for example, has a bit of supercharger, which is a sort of a compression, saturation, distortion kind of thing, kind of unit, and this is what this is doing. So just making it a little bit more aggressive. Now the EQ, not doing much again, just removing a little bit of the bump in the lower mid range, and a bit of that attack which was getting a little bit too harsh in the mix. So with and without. Just a little bit more clean. Now the other snare instead is doing not doing much actually, but it sounds a little bit fatter and a little bit smoother, let's say. Now a little bit of EQ. Again, I removed a little bit of the harshness around 5K for 4.6, and a bit of that bump in the low end because it was getting a little bit muddy in the mix. Then I applied a little bit of gain, but this is just for volume purposes, and a bit of reverb just to give it a bit of space. And actually, that reverb made the snare much smoother and much less aggressive, and that blended in really well with the other snare. So now we have a snare that is really punchy and aggressive and precise, let's say, but not overwhelming, let's say. Now, the hi-hat, for example, is a little bit interesting from the perspective of quantization. Now, um, I played it several times until I got it right, but the thing was I quantized it a little bit, just a little bit, and then removed a little bit of the quantization, so it was still natural somehow. So this is how that sounds. So instead of actually, let me quantize it so you can really tell what it's doing here. This is completely quantized. And this is not quantized. So again, it's just to give it a little bit more of a natural feel, and actually the processing not much. Again, the EQ is not doing anything. The compressors from the patch itself not doing anything. Just a bit of volume, and this multi-band compressor. Again, from the patch, so just leave it like that. Now we have the toms, for example. Now the toms are taken from the original song. It's just another sample from the song. And oops, here we go. And this is how those sound. Actually, let me just mute all the processing. Okay. Now I like the fact that there's a bit of reverb in the sample itself, and it cuts out really abruptly when the sample finishes, and I really like that because it sort of really cuts out the loop, let's say. And it just stops right there, so it builds up a little bit of intensity and then it just stops. Now the EQ, again, really simple. A little bit of high pass to remove the muddiness. I mean the low end, and a bit of removal of that muddiness, and then a little bit of top end removal because it was just getting a little bit too harsh. Now I actually pitched it up by 2 semitones, so the original would sound like this. And it would actually be too slow for the tempo, but that sounded really cool, actually. But let me leave it like this. So it's in tempo, in time with the tempo of the song. Now, a bit of compression. Now, the compression is serving only one purpose, and it's the one of just removing a little bit of the attack, because the attack is getting a little bit too clicky, let's say. So with and without. And it's also giving a little bit more ambience and actually exaggerating that reverb. Now I added one last bit of transient designer just to smooth out the attack, so they're all every hit is consistent and in the characteristic of the attack, and removed a little bit of the sustain just to remove a little bit of the reverb, but I'm not too sure if I actually like it, so let's listen to that. It's not actually doing much, but if I put it there might be a reason. Now, those were the toms. Next thing would be the crashes. Now, the crashes, again, really simple. Just a patch from one of Logic's kits. And here's how that sounds. Those sound. Nothing too special. Sound good. Sound good in context. Right sort of vibe for the song.
Ever survive? Ever survive?
Not much. Just putting an accent on the start of the loop. And that's it for the drums, actually. Oh, no. Hold on. In the breakdown, there's this pattern that I added, and it's basically doing this. Just to give it a little bit more movement and to keep the movement going even in the breakdown section. Now, again, a really standard patch from Logic, and it's the 70s kit from Logic. And I just added a little bit of EQ just to remove that top end and make it sound even more mellow. So there's that. Now, all my drums are being sent to an auxiliary channel. Let's pull them up. All my drums are being sent to an auxiliary channel where they're being pushed through this another instance of Supercharger GT. And I found this really nice preset and tweaked it a little bit. And let's listen to again a with and without. Not doing much, just pulling all the drums together and make them sound more cohesive and more aggressive and just more punchy, and they just worked in the mix. Now, the next thing will be bass, and actually there's two different basses in this song, and one is the normal bass that you hear throughout the song, and the other one, which you might not have heard if you're not listening on either on quality speakers or on headphones or quality headphones. There's a sub bass doing accentuating just the beginning of each downbeat, and it's just repeating throughout the song at various parts. This bass, sub-bass has a little bit of distortion just to give it a little bit more harmonic distortion, harmonics throughout the upper spectrum, and just so it can be a little bit better felt through smaller speakers, although it probably won't be because it's just too low. But if we listen to with and without, this is without. Just bass, really. And this is with the distortion. So it has a little bit more harmonic distortion, so it means that it's gonna come through a little bit better. Now, the other bass instead is much more interesting, and this bass is basically just repeating the notes of the sample. Now let's listen to the bass on the sample. I'll remove the EQ so we can hear it.
Ever survive without you? I'm half alive. Without you, I'm ever.
So that was the bass. Now this bass. Just very simple, repeating the same, pretty much the same notes, and going a little bit more together with the kick, actually. So a nice groove between the kick and the bass. Now the bass is a patch from Kontakt, and it's one of my favorite basses. Not my favorite bass probably, but it worked in this case, and it's a Ska BJ bass. Didn't tweak the patch at all, so nothing interesting there. Just EQ'd the sound a little bit just to make it fit a little bit better with the whole mix. But this is the non-EQ'd sound. And this is with the EQ. It might sound what's going on? It might sound bad on its own, but it actually sounds better in the mix because it has a lot less frequencies happening at the same time. So less bass, less top end, a little bit of the mid-range scooped out, and that just works better in the mix. And for example, let's listen to it with a kick. So with and without EQ with a kick. So I wanted the kick to come through and the bass to be a little bit more in the background together with the samples. So this way the bass is not overpowering the kick drum and the whole mix too much. So the bass together with the sub bass and together with a kick. No sub bass. Sub bass. Just a little bit more power and a little bit more oomph when the loop starts. Now, the last few things actually are the reverse, the reverse symbol, which is here. And that's self-explanatory. Now, for the reverse, actually, let's hear it in context. So it's just building up a little bit towards the beginning of the loop, and I have this this preset that I made for cymbal reverses, and it's pretty much removing every single frequency in order to make it a little bit smoother. And this is how it sounds on its own, I mean without EQ. So really, really harsh, and we don't really want it. It's unnecessary in the mix. Now with the EQ instead, it's just doing what it needs to do, and it actually blends in better with the crash. So it sounds sort of like it's doing. It's sort of one sound instead of two different sounds, if that makes sense. Now in the mix it might make more sense. So it's a nice transition. Now the last thing would be to look at the output chain on the master bus. So again, not much happening. I had a little bit of a build up around 90 hertz, 100 hertz, and literally like -1 dB of reduction. So not much happening right there. And then just a little bit of compression to tie it all together. And this is how it sounds with and without. Oh.
Without you, I'm half alive. Without you, I'll never survive. Without you, I'll have life. Without you, I'll never survive. Never survive. Without you, I'll
There's something about just pushing sub bass, bass, kick drums, and top end, and nice top end into the SSL compressor that just makes sense. I mean, it just blends it all together, and it just makes sense. It just sounds good. So that's pretty much it. I want it to be pretty dynamic, the whole mix, throughout the mix. So I'm not really compressing that much. If you notice, just a little bit of the kick and the snare just barely.
never survive. Without you, I'll have life. Without you, I'll never survive.
And this is the loudest part of the song, so of the beat. So this is the maximum compression that I'm gonna apply to this beat, and it just sounds good like this, so we'll leave it like that. Okay, so that wraps it up for today. Make sure to like and subscribe. Drop a comment below if you'd like to know something else about this video, about the production, about the mixing, about whatever. Make sure to visit sealtheproducer.com/theproducersblog for more audio and production goodness. And while you're there, there's a sign up form on the right or at the bottom if you're on mobile. Sign up to that and you'll receive my free ebook, the 5 mixing techniques you should be using right now. It's awesome. It'll change your life. Plus, you'll receive a week's worth of production and promotion tips. So both engineers and producers will definitely benefit from it. Now, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if there's a request for this type of videos, I'll be posting more of them, definitely. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.